also the IRS does require an in-person site visit. Don't let anybody fool you into thinking that a virtual site visit is okay. It's not okay. The IRS does not allow them. They allowed them during COVID, and that was it. Now that COVID's over, thank God, we do not have the ability to do virtual site visits. But a lot of these companies that popped up and were able to do these virtual site visits during COVID, they didn't want to lose any more of that business because they were able to work all over the country. Whereas when you have to do a local site visit, you're limited to how much you can do. So they'll tell you all day long they can do a virtual site visit and it will stand up in the event of an audit, but it will not. The IRS has been very, very clear about that. So I caution you about the virtual site visits. Make sure it's in person by a reputable engineer or building professional.
Welcome to Short-Term Rental Solutions, a show for hosts and property managers looking to overcome obstacles, maximize revenue, and optimize their short-term rental business by learning from the innovators who are designing the solutions that are shaping our industry. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Short-Term Rental Solutions Show. I am your host, Christiane Crump, and I'm so glad that you have taken the time to join us today because we have a very important show for anyone who's a real estate investor. So one of the things, particularly, obviously in the US, this conversation will be relevant to those who are real estate investors in the United States. There are actually a number of tax implications and things that you should be considering from that tax planning perspective when you start choosing to invest in real estate. And I have counseled with my CPA and been looking at those things as my husband and I have been making real estate purchases, but it's not like it's a one-time conversation because the landscape that we have as far as tax law and real estate investing is constantly changing according to what may or may not be moving through Congress and any changes that come along. So I'm really, really excited about our conversation, my conversation with today's guest, Kim Lochridge. She is very well in, all in with this whole tax and real estate thing. She's a CPA, and I'm just rambling here because I'm just so excited. But Kim, I am so excited to have you on the show today and to get to jump into this topic.
Thanks, Christiane. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate the offer, and I'm excited to share it with everyone. I think it'll be a good show.
Yeah. So just kind of give us a little introduction to who you are and kind of where you are in this space and kind of where you sit in the sense of the different organizations and whatnot that you're connected to so that we understand the perspective that you're bringing to this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having the opportunity to earn the right to speak with you and your guests today. So a little bit about my background. I've been investing in real estate since the late 90s personally. I've been with the Engineered Tax Services of the company we're representing today. And Engineered Tax Services is a specialty tax firm. We specialize in specialty tax products like cost segregation, research and development tax credits, 179D and the 45L, which are energy certifications that you can get for real estate. But primarily, I think we're going to be discussing mostly cost segregation today. And, my background, I've been able to, really have the ability, with the freedom to structure my own taxes and be very involved in my own taxes and then be able to use that knowledge to, bring to the masses and, kind of doing that altruistically so that, other people can understand the very complexities that lie within the tax code. My husband is now retired and he is managing all of our real estate. So he'll laugh when we say he's retired, but we retired him from his W-2 job. Let's put it that way. And now he works full time as our a real estate professional in our family. Although we both, are in real estate, that's what we do. So I actually have my license and don't practice selling properties or anything like that, but I have it just because I have my expertise in what I'm doing in the field. My background has been in finance and accounting my whole life. So I've been an entrepreneur all the way through to doing what I'm doing today with ETS. And it's actually been a great ride because, as mentioned, I get to learn a lot about, taxes and being able to apply those to my own portfolio and then turning around and helping other people as well.
Yeah, great. So, for people who may or may not be familiar with what a cost segregation is, I don't want to leave anybody behind in the course of our conversation today. So let's just kind of start with a basic explanation of what a cost segregation study is.
Yeah, so the basics, there's a lot of myths out there. There's a lot of YouTube videos or there's just a lot of noise.
Yeah.
There's a lot of noise out there when it comes to cost segregation. So in a nutshell, a cost segregation study is essentially where you're able to go into a property and instead of depreciating it over 27 and a half or 39 years, we can do a cost seg study and we can compartmentalize all of the assets in the property, give it a value, and then apply it against the IRS's approved pricing guide. When we do that, the IRS realizes that not all of those assets in the property are going to last 39 years or 27 and a half years. Those two amounts are interchangeable. So to set the precedence going forward, 27 and a half years is usually reserved for residential property, real estate. 39-year is reserved for commercial property like retail, but also for short-term rentals. So when I say 27 and a half or 39-year, those are interchangeable. Just know that when I say 39-year, we're going to be talking about both of those long-term buckets. But essentially, the IRS knows that some of those assets are not going to last that long period of time, 39 years. So they give us the alternative to straight line depreciation, which is called the MAKERS methodology. That MAKERS methodology allows us to break down the assets in the building and then put those in different depreciable buckets. So you're not having to depreciate the entire property over that 39 or 27 and a half year mark. In return, that gives us additional deductions on against our income so that we can utilize that and, leave more money in our pocket instead of paying Uncle Sam.
Yeah.
In a nutshell, it's a study that substantiates that.
So let's take, to make it really simple, an example of like a particular item, say, carpet. I mean, and is it mostly just things that are attached to the home, like plumbing fixtures, faucets, or can it also include like the couch,
Yeah, great question. When we do a cost seg study, we're actually establishing what was there at the time of purchase.
Okay.
What was in the property? What was, installed? So we're looking at everything: roof, windows, doors, interior finishes, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, landscaping, molding, anything that was there at the time of purchase, right? Usually things that are installed or attached to the home. I like to say if you take the home and dump it upside down, whatever would fall out is the stuff that, that the furniture and things like that. Then obviously we don't touch that. But the things that are attached, we're going to reallocate. To your first question about the carpeting, a carpet, instead of being depreciated over 39 years, it's kind of ridiculous because we all know that you're going to replace carpeting every 5 years traditionally. So the IRS allows us to put that into a 5-year bucket, or a 5-year class life is what we call it, which means that normally that gets depreciated now over 5 years instead of 39 and a half or 39 or 27 and a half years.
Right. So basically, still sticking with the carpet, the cost segregation will, I'm sure, figure out how many square feet of the house has carpeting and then allocate a value to the, carpeting. I'm assuming there's like some table somewhere or something that says, carpet is basically worth this much. I don't know. And then whatever that value turns out to be, that becomes that deduction that can then be, taken over that 5-year span. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We value the carpeting, the flooring, the amount of what is in the building. Cost seg studies, you do have to have a third party building professional come do the cost seg. Some CPAs try and do them, but they are not allowed to break down the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing unless you're an engineer. So you're kind of just leaving money on the table if you're paying for that person to do a study. You really want to get the best bang for your buck, and breaking down the mechanical, the electrical and plumbing, all the things that service those assets. For instance, in a short-term rental, you're going to have, like a dishwasher, garbage disposal, microwave, range, and a refrigerator, right? Pretty standard. What we do is we actually break down, because those assets are 5-year assets and get depreciated over 5 years. We put those in a 5-year bucket, but then also all of the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing that service those assets also get to go into a 5-year class life. So, you think of your plumbing lines from the dishwasher to the garbage disposal. Think of the line that goes from your sink to your refrigerator for the water dispenser. Those types of things are plumbing that get to go. Electrical, there's electrical that's dedicated electrical to service just those assets. The electrical lines all the way from that port or that outlet all the way back to the breaker box get to go into a 5-year asset because it's specialty for that property. So it's not as simple as just walking in and saying, oh, my carpet is worth X and let's just appreciate it over 5 years. You have to prove it. The IRS doesn't, unless you're a building professional, you have to have, you can't just break down the assets. Now, if you're just getting new carpet, that's a different story. You've got the property and you're just going to get some new carpet and then you can put that on a 5-year class, like that's fine. But you can't, if you buy the property and it has all these assets in it, you really need to have them broken out in a cost seg study.
All right. So the purpose of choosing to get a cost segregation study is that we are wanting to get those deductions basically on our taxes. So let's shift now and talk about who would be a good candidate to choose to do a cost segregation. Is it something that, all real estate investors should be considering? I'm assuming not. So why or why not would it be worthwhile or appropriate to be considering doing a cost segregation?
That's a great question. It's kind of a loaded question because there are some people that have a lot of varying degrees of when you should or if you should do a cost seg study. And trust me when I tell you, I have heard every single one. I have heard, no, we shouldn't do a cost seg study because we're going to hold the property for a long period of time. I've heard we shouldn't do a cost seg study because we're going to hold it for a short period of time. I've heard, no, I shouldn't do a cost seg study because I'm a passive investor. I've heard I shouldn't do it because I'm an active investor. I've heard both sides of the argument on every scale of it. You can be assured of that. So the bottom line is that, there are some rare cases where you probably are not a good candidate for a cost seg study. If you're going to do a fix and flip, no cost seg. That's because you're never really putting the property in service. It's never going to be rented out. You're going to pick it up. You're going to renovate it. You're going to turn around and sell it. You might put a renter in there and then sell it, but chances are you're not holding it long enough to actually have any kind of depreciation. And we're working with the depreciation. So that would be, somewhere where I would say, fix and flips just don't pan out. Mm-hmm. The other, arguments, if you're going to hold it long term, all the more reason to do a cost seg, because you the longer you hold the property, the more improvements you're going to be putting into that property. And when you do a cost seg study and you do it right, you have the ability to use that report into perpetuity as long as you own that building. And you're going to use that when you're doing improvements. You have the original value of that original asset. And then as you pull those assets out because of renovation or improvements or things they're doing, you have the ability to take that asset off the books and take what's called partial asset disposition. That can only happen in the year that you remove it. You can't do it retroactively. So it's a report that will pay you back year over year. Okay. Mm. So if you're going to hold it for a long period, it's a no-brainer to do a cost seg. Short-term holds, if you're going to hold it for a short-term period of time, meaning 5 years or less, 2 years or less, at minimum, it's going to be a tax deferral, right? So why wouldn't you want to take a tax deferral? Use that money as you can during that period of time that you still own it. and up until the time you have to pay the taxes. But the nice thing to know and what you need to realize is that when you get to take the deductions from a cost seg study, you're getting those deductions at ordinary income rates. When you sell real estate, you actually have capital gains rates. So you have an immediate arbitrage of about 10 to 15% right off the bat. So regardless, you're going to take deductions at a higher amount than what you have to give some of it back. Okay. So, and I think where this really comes in is the bonus depreciation, because you're essentially taking an advance on a paycheck, right? So we can get into the bonus depreciation and explain that as we go. But I think that anyone who is in real estate and they have an income producing property, and they're paying tax, they should do a cost seg study. If they have passive losses, or they're a passive investor and they don't qualify for the real estate professional status, it's still going to offset your passive income. So, it's still going to help you. Maybe not as good as if you can offset your W-2s or your main income, but it's still going to help you offset the passive activity from that income. And you can group things together. So if you own 4 or 5 properties, you can group those together, and this one might be cash flowing and the other one isn't, but you get to use the losses from one to offset the other. So it becomes a brilliant strategy. And here's the kicker. When you're a passive investor, okay, and you have losses from a real estate property, like for cost seg or from bonus depreciation or whatever, when you sell that property, those losses automatically convert to active. So now you're going to just take those losses and offset your W-2 when you sell it anyway. So you're not penalized by just carrying the losses along. In fact, they create a tax asset on your books, and it is not a bad thing. You may not be able to use them right away, but eventually it does make it pretty incentivizing to be able to do it, even if you're a passive investor. So I haven't found very many properties where it doesn't make sense to do a cost seg.
Well, 2 things have come up as I've listened to you. First of all, I myself and other people might be thinking, wow, I have a property that, in my case, we purchased this property in 2014 and just used it as a private second home, and then finally put it into service in 2021 as a short-term rental. And when I talked to an accounting professional locally, they said, you've owned this home long enough, you're far enough into that 39 or whatever years that it probably doesn't make sense to do a cost segregation. So we didn't. But, talk to me a little bit about that. People who are like, oh, you know what? I haven't done one for one reason or another, but is there ever such thing as it's too late to do one? Or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there is, it would come down to the reason why you would want to do it. But typically my rule of thumb is that if you've owned it for more than 15 years, it probably doesn't make sense to do a cost seg study on it now, unless you've had substantial improvements. Then it always makes sense. And it doesn't ever hurt to go back and do a cost seg study on the original purchase so that you have that going forward, so that when you do have ongoing improvements or whatnot, that you can still utilize the benefits from it. And that's what people miss. It kills me sometimes because, first of all, like with your particular situation, you bought the home as a second home in 2014, but you didn't start depreciating it until 2021. So technically speaking, you've only depreciated 3 years out of 39. I think it's a great opportunity for you to do a cost seg study.
We'll have a conversation after we record the episode.
Yeah. And see, that's what kills me is like, yeah, you've owned it since 2014, but it was not a depreciable asset until 2021. So, it just kills me sometimes, the information that you get online, or maybe even from a CPA sometimes. Not dogging CPAs, because they're just overworked and underpaid. I'll tell you that right now. But and I know that they seem really expensive, but I'm telling you right now, your CPA is worth their weight in gold. Okay. And there is going to be a very, very difficult, transition period ongoing, because we've got 70% of all CPAs are going to be practicing CPAs are going to be retired in the next 7 years. Wow. So we are going to have a really major problem with not having someone to do our taxes. Right. Anyways, let's not get sidetracked. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely think that, I know that the 2021 property that you put in as a short-term rental is absolutely a candidate for a cost seg study. And you should probably do that. Because it's just going to help you with, with your taxes, especially if you're doing well with the returns. But as far as, other times to do cost seg, like I said, we can kind of go through different scenarios like that and, you know, talk about it. But
yeah, it's almost too bad we don't have like a Q&A session here, because I'm sure there's going to be tons of people who have questions. Maybe we'll have to have you back on the show. If anybody has questions as you're listening to the show or things come up, I'll put a link to our STR Hub Facebook group in there. Post your questions in there, and we'll see if we can't get Kim to join us again and answer some of those, because this topic is wide and deep. And so there's literally no way we can really cover everything in the course of this podcast. But okay, so what's typically involved in getting a cost segregation? And as we're looking for someone to do a cost segregation for us, how do we vet them? How do we know that we're actually finding someone that we can trust to give us, I don't even know what the criteria is to know whether I've gotten a really high quality cost segregation or just kind of a quick and dirty cost seg. Can you educate us a little bit on that?
Yeah, I can. I appreciate the question too, because there are, just like in any industry, there's good players and there's bad players, and you're going to run into them, and there's, it's going to sound great. And sometimes, it just doesn't turn out so great. Right. So unfortunately, there definitely are things you want to look for. A reputable cost segregation firm is going to do an engineered based study. That means that an engineer actually goes to the site, not a photographer, not an appraiser, but an actual engineer or somebody who is a building professional. A CPA can't do that. An appraiser can't do that. They're literally just looking at the finishes and what's in that property. A photographer certainly isn't going to be able to document that. We're looking at the assets that are in the property, the finishes that are in the property, the landscaping, the exterior. We're also looking at the age of every one of those assets. What condition is the roof in? How old are the windows? We're looking at a lot of different factors. When you have a photographer go, you just don't get that same documentation. I don't care who you are. So, and also the IRS does require an in-person site visit. Don't let anybody fool you into thinking that a virtual site visit is okay. It's not okay. The IRS does not allow them. They allowed them during COVID, and that was it. Now that COVID's over, thank God, we do not have the ability to do virtual site visits. But a lot of these companies that popped up and were able to do these virtual site visits during COVID, they didn't want to lose any more of that business because they were able to work all over the country. Whereas when you have to do a local site visit, you're limited to how much you can do. So they'll tell you all day long they can do a virtual site visit and it will stand up in the event of an audit, but it will not. The IRS has been very, very clear about that. So I caution you about the virtual site visits. Make sure it's in person by a reputable engineer or building professional. That's probably the biggest thing. The second thing is that you want to look for somebody who's not just doing a calculation or a square foot analysis. They're not taking the square footage of the building and finding some specs on Google and throwing a percentage at it. You've got to actually have a cost breakdown of each of those assets. And when we do our report, you're going to see not only is there a cost breakdown and a summary, but also in the detail, the engineering pages, you're going to see a very detailed fixed asset report. Every elbow in the plumbing behind the wall, the size of that plumbing, how many counts there are, or what the lineal footage or the cubic footage is of that, or the square footage, however we're doing the unit. How many light switch plate curves are there on the wall, right? I mean, we're talking some really major detail. So just make sure that if there's not that detail of telling you exactly how much footage or unit price or for each asset, that's not a valid study. That's a DIY study, or it's a square foot analysis. They can't give you that if they're not doing it in an engineer-based study. So there are a lot of things to look out for. Not all cost seg studies are created equal. And there are a lot of companies out there, the DIYs, you're going to do your own site visit. Sorry, won't fly. you're gonna be spending $500 to $800 on a DIY cost seg and think that they're pulling one, saving you a bunch of money. But if you get audited, it will not stand up. That's the bottom line. The IRS has been very clear about that. So just be very careful about, the company they're going with. There's been a lot of pop-up companies in cost seg regionally over the last, 5-10 years. We've been in business for 22 years. We're not going anywhere. We have a very heavy, really good relationship with the Department of Treasury. Personally, I'm on the tax committee for the Real Estate Roundtable in Washington, D.C. And we work with a tremendous amount of CPAs across the country as well, to help facilitate these rules. So just be careful. Just beware. If it talks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck,
What if someone's gotten a cost segregation and as they're listening to this episode, they're kind of having like their heart is starting to race and they're thinking, oh my gosh, it sounds like the cost segregation study that I paid for to have done for my property probably isn't going to hold up or isn't as good as I had hoped that it was going to be. What do you do?
Well, there's a couple options. I mean, if you've already gotten the study and you're there, just be aware of it. Be aware that, if you get audited, there's a chance that you may not be able to keep those benefits. And that's always a concern. And so, in many cases, like a square foot analysis study that's done just on the square footage of the property or whatnot, typically will double the benefits on that. And that poses a whole nother question because some CPAs are like, oh, that's just too aggressive. We don't want to be that aggressive because that'll get you audited, but it's all substantiated in science. There's no question about where those numbers are coming from. It's literally a replacement cost of those assets. So essentially, we will let everybody know that, this is an engineer-based study and our prices aren't that much higher than a square foot analysis study. They're just very different reports. So we will be able to work with your CPA to help you. But in many cases, if you've had a cost seg study done, we can give you a quote to see how aggressive that was, or if it needs to be substantiated. If you get under an audit situation where they throw out your cost seg, please call us. We can help you with that. We can help get it substantiated and get you another one that will work out and probably better in many cases, because we do have that condition factor. So.
Okay. So it's not too late, everybody. If you've got a cost segregation that was done for your property in the past and you're a little bit nervous about it, it sounds like you can, hire a firm and they will come in and kind of do that engineered analysis. And so you can kind of protect yourself with that additional analysis to make sure that it will hold up in the case that you get audited. Or if you find yourself in an audit, bring a team in that can help substantiate and clear up any issues that may have arisen because of kind of an iffy cost seg that you may have gotten in the past. So thank you. I'm sure that there are people who are going to be grateful to know that there is a recourse if they're a little bit nervous about the study that they've gotten. Okay, so what do you think as far as, like you mentioned, you're on this real estate roundtable in Washington, D.C., and you have a pretty extensive network in the industry. So as you are kind of looking out there and seeing the things that are going on, what do you feel is the climate as far as tax law and cost segregations? And I'm going to ask a follow-up question on that as far as where do you see real estate, and what would be your advice to real estate professionals now here in 2024? So first off, give us kind of your read on the pulse of where things are, and then kind of give us your opinion as far as some thoughts if we're considering investing in 2024.
Yeah, I'm afraid my advice might not be very popular.
Well, be honest. We want the truth, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a little bit bearish on the real estate, especially residential. I think especially those who've been in the short-term rental space for, a good decade or so, we're starting to see a huge uptick in new short-term rentals coming on the market. Probably those listeners are some of those people that have 4 or 5 or 10, right? And so, we're starting to see an influx. make no mistake about that. There is economics 101, supply and demand. The more Airbnbs we have coming on the market, the more it's going to drive costs down, and it's going to drive down your rentals, your guests, because there's going to have a lot more options, right? So the short-term market is getting a little tough. We're already starting to feel it. We're starting to feel, guests a little bit more demanding. We're starting to see guests that are negotiating more. We're starting to see just a downturn in actual, guest bookings. And we're having to cut the pricing to get guests in there, right? So we're not making as much as we were 5-10 years ago, right? So I think that's going to continue. When you have the benefits of, cost segregation, material participation in short-term rentals, we end up having the ability, to take very large tax deductions, which turns around and incentivizes more people to do it, right? Which now, I've always said, never do an investment unless it's going to pencil on its own and stand on its own without any tax incentives. Tax incentives can go away tomorrow, right? In fact, in some cases, tax incentives can go away before you even close on that property, or before you do what it is that you're going to do. So they expire, they come, they go. So you have to make sure that your deal is going to be a pencilable deal at the time, that you purchase it with your economics, and be realistic with those economics. Be realistic about the occupancy rates and make sure that you're running it at a worst case scenario. Overall, I'm a little bit nervous about the STR. So, I'm nervous about more and more coming on the market, and I think we're going to end up having some difficulties. I think it's not a coincidence that we started to see 10, 15 years ago, the multifamily market blowing up. Apartment complexes are going in on every corner. You can see those. You're not blind. People aren't blind when they're driving around and they're seeing the communities that are being built, the homes. And I think a lot of that actually had to do with the disruption of Airbnbs and VRBOs. What was happening is that we had the houses, but most of them were rentals, and they were now converted into short-term rentals. So they were pulled off of the long-term market rental market. And as a result of those, because people were making way more money at the short-term rentals, they ended up creating a housing shortage. We already had a housing shortage to begin with, but to go into that, now you have an influx of multifamily over the last decade, and you have an influx of short-term rentals. And I think what's going to happen is the short-term rentals are going to start not making as much money as they did, and they're going to start trying to convert them into a long-term rental. And that's going to be a very, very surprising number when they start to see how low that rents are. And likely, in many cases, they won't be able to cover their mortgage or their costs. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to end up seeing a pretty big downturn in residential pricing market. We're already seeing it in multifamily. We're seeing the 3 months free rent. We're seeing draws to get tenants in. Their prices are lowering, so we have a lot at stake. Not to mention we have our biggest social generation, right? The baby boomers are now passing away. Christiane, our parents are getting to that age. If yours haven't already, my mom just passed away. My dad is ill. They're in that tranche, and what's happening? What happens to their homes? The homes come on the market, and now you have the biggest generation who is going to be selling homes. What are people going to do with those? So you have this perfect storm happening. And it's gonna create problems. We're gonna see it in 24? No, I don't think it's gonna happen in an election year. I think 25, 26 is our biggest danger.
Yeah. Well, did you get that, everybody? Were you listening? All of that logic makes sense. Like, I can totally follow your line of reasoning all the way through. And so I would say, if you're listening to this show, I hope you caught Kim's advice, make sure that what you are planning, if you're considering investing, look very closely and run those numbers before you buy. I am beginning to start property managing, just this fledgling, teeny tiny little emerging property management company. But I'm at the stage now where I'm beginning to have conversations with owners who are wanting to, have someone help them with their homes. And I feel like I've had the conversation multiple times already with people who are like, oh, we, just love coming to this area. And so we thought it'd be great to buy a house and that we would just put it on Airbnb to help offset our mortgage. And, but unfortunately, thus far, there's been a number of people who I've had that conversation with. They did not run the numbers. I don't know what they were imagining offsetting, quote, quote, their mortgage was going to look like. But as I'm giving them rental revenue projections, based on, recent historical data in the last couple of years, and looking at, okay, these are the peak seasons, these are the shoulder seasons. You're probably, April is a super low month in this market. It's like 15 to maybe 20% occupancy. You need to understand that you're probably going to be carrying the majority of your mortgage that month, and people, when I've been having these conversations, I feel like they kind of get wide-eyed and kind of bluster a little bit, because the reality of the market that they've chosen to purchase in is different than what they imagined that market was going to be like. And kind of like you said, they've been hearing things and, other people who have properties and they're making so much money, but it's not static. It's completely dynamic. And like you said, economics 101, the supply is increasing dramatically, and there's not necessarily an equal increase in travelers to, stay level with the increase in supply. And so that's why we're seeing some of the pressures on our market and pressures on our average nightly rate. So I'm going to, kind of back you up with what you feel could be on the horizon for the real estate market. I certainly don't have the expertise and kind of the connections in the industry that you do to you probably have more authority in that than I do, but I personally am feeling a little cautious as well, as far as my husband and I did not choose to purchase a property in 2023. And we're kind of holding pattern as far as 2024. We kind of have a bundle of money where we could potentially invest, but like you said, I'm going to be really cautious and make sure that it looks like it'll pencil out, regardless. And so that would kind of be my advice to people, and spread the word. My goodness. If you know people that are considering investing in short-term rental real estate, share this podcast episode with them, help them get educated. I think it's important that people kind of have, an honest voice speaking about the potential pros and cons. There's lots of amazing reasons. I don't want to kind of say that nobody should be investing. There's still a lot of great reasons to potentially be investing in real estate, but you really need to understand kind of all angles of what that could potentially look like. So thank you so much, Kim, for sharing that. And you know what? I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. As I said, kind of midway through, I feel like this is a conversation, and I'm really thankful for Kim, being with us today and sharing her expertise. But I'd love to keep this conversation going. So if you have more questions or, other things that are considerations and things that you're wondering about as far as the tax implications of real estate investing, we're of course going to make sure that you have a way to contact Kim and her engineered tax services. Yes, the firm that she works with. We want to make sure that we can connect you guys up to them. Their team would be more than happy to answer those questions. But again, feel free to also jump over in the STR HUB Facebook group, and we'll be happy to help gather your questions and see if we can get you answers from Kim and her team as well. So thank you so much, Kim, for joining us today.
No problem, Christiane. Do you mind if I leave my email address so they can email us directly?
Absolutely. Tell us how we can get in touch with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. So you can reach us at my first and last name. It's just K Lochridge, and that's KLOCHRIDGE at engineered with the ED on the end, tax services with the the S on the end. So Lochridge at engineeredtaxservices.com. You can email me directly. I'd be happy to take your questions. Just let me know that you heard us from the STR Hub. We always like to make sure that Christiane gets some recognition for that too, as well, for her efforts at putting this show together. So Christiane, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, no problem. No problem at all. All right, you guys, thanks for joining us this week. And we look forward to having you back for next week's show, where we'll have an interesting and helpful conversation to help us overcome obstacles, maximize revenue, and optimize our short-term rental business.